I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here. Glad to have you along as well. Before we get into today's show, call somebody up, send a text, a tweet, a Facebook post, a IG post, and let folks know that the conversation with Al McFarlane is on live right now. We want your help in growing our audience, our subscriptions. You can subscribe to this program. That means you get notification every day we go live by going to YouTube Insight News MN. We've crossed the 500 subscriber threshold. Our goal is to get 1,000. Thanks to the 500 plus who have subscribed already. We appreciate you, and we want you to help us grow that exponentially. Let's target 1,000 subscribers and do what you can to let people know that we're having a conversation. It's a good conversation. I call it robust conversation, and they'll be pleased and I'll be pleased. Well, today's program is going to be special. I have the honor of hanging out with our book review editor today, and Brother WD Foster-Graham, a book author, a book enthusiast, I would call him almost a book impresario, but committed to understanding and developing our sense of awareness of the power of the word, the power of language, and the importance of documenting our story, our analysis, our history, and dreaming futures that we commit to paper in the form of books and other forms of writing and creative expression. WD, good afternoon. Good to see you. How you doing, man?
Good afternoon, Al. I'm glad to be here one more time.
There we go. Well, you've done marvelous work in connecting us to creative spirits in the community, and today is no exception. Let me have you talk about our guest today, Brother Joseph Mbele, Professor Joseph Mbele.
Thanks, Al. Professor Joseph Mbele, he's a Tanzanian. He is a professor in the English department at St. Olaf College, and he is a cultural consultant that's helping Africans and Americans navigate cultural differences. He is educated at the universities of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania and in Wisconsin and Madison. He's specializing in global literature in English and folklore. And he's published many articles and several books. His books, Africans and Americans, Embracing Cultural Differences, and Chickens in the Bus, More Thoughts on Cultural Differences, are very popular among Americans who go to Africa and Africans who live in the USA. On November 23rd, 2017, his book, Matengo Folktales, was featured on the acclaimed American game show Jeopardy! So without further ado, I am happy to introduce Professor Joseph Mbele.
Thank you. Welcome, Professor. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm curious about so much, and especially this conversation about how we connect in culture, what culture means to us, how we take culture for granted too often. So let me have you talk, first of all, about what motivates your delving into the issue of cultural differences between Africans and Americans. I'm presuming that means African Americans and Africans.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I guess my interest was sparked by my first experience in the USA. I was teaching at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And then in 1980, I came to the University of Wisconsin in Madison for graduate studies. So that was my first experience in a foreign culture. And so seeing all the things that were different, and I'm talking about the way people behave, the way they talk, the way they act, the way they look at you. It was quite an experience. But I didn't have the time maybe to really think about it. I just experienced it, and it sounded, strange and funny and weird maybe. That was it for 6 years. And then I went back to my country when I finished my doctoral studies. And then that was 1986. 5 years later, I was recruited by St. Olaf College in Minnesota here, Northfield, Minnesota. So now teaching here and interacting with Americans, every day brought back those same experiences. And then I began to actually think about those experiences
Mhm.
because I was involved now as an advisor on study abroad programs. A lot of colleges in the USA, a lot of universities have programs like that where they send students to other countries. So I found myself in that position, advising students before they went to Africa. It was Zimbabwe, it was Botswana, it was Tanzania, it was Ghana. The process of advising them made me think about cultural differences, what you are going to experience over there, how to interpret the behavior of those Africans, and how you should talk with them, and why you should not, you know, judge things, before you've understood, where
Mm.
the people are coming from.
Mhm.
So I began to think about the cultural differences. And then because I was advising Americans, not just students, but also regular Americans going to Africa for reasons, such as tourism, or they're going there to volunteer. Or here in Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa, there are those Lutherans who have what they call mission trips. They have
Mhm.
groups going to Africa. So I really got these opportunities to think about the differences. And so it was hard work, trying to understand the American ways in relation to the African ways. And so I began to write and write and write. And that resulted in my first book in that topic. The differences between American and African culture. That's how I wrote that book, Africans and Americans Embracing Cultural Differences.
And so the focus of that book was broadly Americans, not particularly African
Yes,
Americans, correct?
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. And people ask me that question. They are quite specific. They say, and here I mean African Americans, they say, do you mean Americans? Do you include African Americans? And
Mhm.
it's a very interesting question. And
Mhm.
I've thought about it. And I know African Americans, many of them at least, that I've encountered, they say there are differences, between the white American culture and the African American culture. And I respect that view completely. And I agree completely. But as an African looking into the American society, I do see common elements
Mhm.
that define Americans as Americans, whether they're black or white.
Explore that if you would. That's interesting. And what
Yeah,
does that look like as an
e-
African or as a person who's not American? How do
exactly,
you detail those commonalities? How you describe those?
exactly. And before I get there, let me just introduce a little thing here. There's this famous African American writer, James Baldwin.
Mhm.
He was American. I mean, he grew up here, and he really knew there was a big difference between the white culture and the black culture while he was here in the US.
Mhm.
And then he moved to live in France.
Yes.
He spent many years in France, and he wrote this article now called um, The Discovery of What It Means to Be American. People can Google that. The
Mm.
discovery of what it means to be American. He confessed that being out of the USA now and living in Europe, he discovered he was very American,
Mhm.
Mm.
just like the white American guy from Texas.
Mhm.
Now, this is something that I tell people. While you are here, you will have certain feelings, certain beliefs, but go out of the USA Go to, say, Zimbabwe or China or wherever, you will discover you are American. Those are the things I'm talking about. So in the book, I just talk about, Americans.
Mhm.
And then coming to your question, there are quite a few things that I highlight. For example, attitudes towards money. I talk about this in the book. There's a whole chapter titled Money Talks. Americans have a particular attitude towards money. And when you go to Africa, when you live with Africans, when you interact with Africans, you will see how American you are, you know. And so I talk about, quite a number of things. And people just have to read the book to know what I'm talking about. So deep inside, I sincerely believe it's valid to talk about Americans while recognizing there are differences between African Americans and white Americans, just as there are differences between New Yorkers and Californians,
Mhm.
Americans of the South versus Americans of the Midwest. I acknowledge those differences. But behind all this, there are serious commonalities. And those are the ones that I'm dealing with. And it is safe for an American going to Africa, for example, to hear what I'm saying so that they can be prepared, for the experiences they will have.
A lot of more African Americans are looking at going to Africa or back to Africa is the language we use. What about that phenomenon? What's your observation about the increased interest in African Americans returning to
Yeah,
Africa?
yeah. Uh, it's a very interesting topic. It's a very interesting topic. I've thought about it. And in the last few years, I have focused on actually working with those people. When
Mhm.
I'm in Tanzania, for example, I give talks to the African Americans who are there, helping them to navigate the cultural differences. So I have a particular interest. Now, back to your question. First of all, I follow the story very closely and I hear what they are saying, why they are going to Africa. Many of them simply say, we are Africans. We were brought to the USA against our will and we are returning home. I agree with that argument. I support those people who feel that way because the history is there. They came from there or they were forcibly taken out of there. So
Mhm.
I sympathize and agree with these people who say they are returning home. Um, I also know, I also know there are many African Americans who say um, they are not Africans, that America is their home.
Mhm.
And I agree with them too.
Mhm.
And they have compelling reasons. For example, they say, we built this country.
Mhm.
We have a right to be here and to benefit, from
Mhm.
whatever America has to offer. We built it. I think this is a compelling argument, and I absolutely, agree with these people as well. So I respect the different viewpoints. And the ones who go to Africa now, what I do is to alert them to the fact that they will encounter cultural differences. And so I work very patiently. In fact, recently, I think a few months ago, I have created a course, an online course, to give guidance to these people who are going to Africa to settle forever.
Mm.
A, a whole course, an online course,
Mhm.
because I fear that many of them go out without that awareness. They think, oh, we are going to be among black people, no racism, which is true. You know, we go there and everybody is black. You know, the police officer is black, the government official is black, the managers are black, the teachers are black. For African Americans of that kind, this is very attractive,
Mm-hmm.
and I agree with them. But I do want them to know skin color is not everything.
Mm-hmm.
They are going to go
Mm.
there and discover they are American.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what is the African culture like? You know, what are the things that are acceptable in Africa, in African culture? It's just a way of helping them settle and flourish back in Africa.
And I guess it's the same as when Africans immigrate to the U.S. And they have this sense of duality. Number one, they're here, they're operating in the economy and the culture, but they have this sense of home. Could be, Mogadishu, could be Accra, or South Africa. But they are conscious of being in both places and being of both places. But then their children and then their children's children, for them, it's a different story.
Yes, yes. And it is a problematic story also when it comes to the children. It
Mm-hmm.
is seriously problematic. Those African parents coming from Mogadishu, Lagos, uh, Addis Ababa, or Dar es Salaam, they have that mentality, of just being African. Many of them grew up in rural Africa, like me,
Mm-hmm.
and we have those values. And then we come here, and then we have children born here who
Mm-hmm.
have no experience of the African culture back there.
Mm-hmm.
And now the expectations of the parents about, say, good behavior, and the children are growing up here and they are assimilating American concepts of good behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes these are as loggerheads
Mm-hmm.
with the African idea of good behavior. For example, African parents, back in Africa, you know, uh, the way they bring up the children, things like eye contact. When your father or your mother is angry because of something you did, you are a little boy, a little girl, you don't look them in the face,
Mm-hmm.
because doing so at that moment is impudence.
Mm-hmm.
You will aggravate the parents. The same with your school teacher. When the teacher, you know, calls you to the office, you did something wrong, and they are talking to you, warning you or whatever, you don't look them in the eye. And those poor African children now here, they are taught different things. Uh, Look at the teacher's eye,
Mm-hmm.
look at, maintain eye contact. Now, when these poor children go back to the African parents, unless they know exactly what American culture is, they will be aggravated all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kinds of things I'm
Yes.
talking about. They are not, to be taken lightly. They are not to be taken lightly.
Let me
Yeah.
pivot a little bit and ask you to talk about your journey from childhood in Tanzania to now to becoming
Yeah.
a professor. What's your story?
Wow. That's a very interesting question. Thank you. I grew up in a rural place. I'm a very rural, you know, person in a village in southern Tanzania, up in the mountains. Yes, it's a cool, cold place. And so I grew up, helping my parents, take care of of the cows, the goats, the chickens. Absolutely. Working in the fields, and we used to hose. Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
then I went to school, elementary school in the village, middle school, some distance away. It was a boarding school, but still in southern Tanzania.
Mm-hmm.
But my father was very strict with me. He wanted me not only to excel, but strangely, whenever I looked at my exercise book, you know how you have an exercise book, you do,
Sure.
tests and so
Yep.
on, you
Mhm.
get grades,
Mhm.
say 95, percent
Mhm.
or 85. My father always said, why didn't you get 100
Mhm.
on
Yeah.
every page, on every test? And I was just a little boy, and my father is pushing me to get 100% on every test. It's an incredible thing, but as a child, I was somewhat afraid that if I don't get 100, my father won't be pleased.
Mhm.
So that thing has been with me throughout my school career. So I went through high school and did my best. I went through college. I really, really pursued excellence, and fortunately, I ended up, at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Um, so my father was the biggest influence, pushing me. And even now, whatever I do, my father passed away many years ago, but his voice is still there.
Mm.
Why didn't you get 100%? Yeah. So I strive to be the best. I strive to be the best. You cannot be the best every day, but I have never relaxed, you know. And if I don't perform extremely well, I feel guilty. I know my father would not be pleased.
I ask my African American guests to talk about what they know about their personal family lineages. And I think it would be wonderful to ask you the same question. What does lineage mean to you? What significance does it play in the culture in general, but in your life in particular? And I will ask somebody that maybe is from Chicago or Detroit, who was your mother? Who was your father? Who were their parents? Who were their parents? How far back can you go? Because with
Uh-huh.
all of us, invariably, we can go back maybe 3 generations, maybe four. The lucky
Uh-huh.
ones may be able to go back, 5 generations, but that's rare,
Uh-huh.
rare.
Uh-huh.
What about you? And what does it mean anything to you?
Uh-huh. That's a very good question. You'll be surprised. Most of us in Africa, most of us, um, we are not different from the scenario you have explained.
Hmm.
If you ask me, I can tell you my father, my grandpa, great grandpa, great grandma, maybe great great grandma, maybe, but
Hmm.
honestly, it's not such an issue.
Hmm.
Yeah, honestly. However, that's why I said most of us. You look at some other African societies where they were more or less feudal, you know,
Hmm.
they had, say, a chief
Hmm.
in charge of the community, or a chief, or an emperor, like in Ethiopia,
Hmm.
Um, the royal families, the family of the chief, they had a vested interest in keeping those records. In places like West Africa, for example, many parts of West Africa, Mali, Burkina Faso, all the way to Gambia, Senegal, they had the poets, the court poet, the griot.
Hmm.
And the griot was a historian. The griot was an entertainer. The
Hmm.
griot was a counselor of the king or the chief or whatever, and so the emperor. So the griots kept the memory of the royal family. They could go back generations and generations and generations, because again, this had ideological functions to establish the legitimacy of the kingship.
Hmm.
That we go very far, and like in Mali, for example, they go all the way to King Sundiata, 14th century,
Hmm.
long, long ago. So those are the differences. Or Ethiopia, for example, they go all the way to King Solomon, uh-huh, the biblical King Solomon.
Hmm.
Yeah, Ethiopia, I'm talking about the Ethiopia of Emperor Haile Selassie. It's not the Ethiopia of today. So those are the distinctions I would make. Actually, most Africans, they don't keep those memories because they don't really matter.
Hmm.
They are not challenged
Hmm.
by circumstances to retain those memories.
How do creation stories exist
Uh-huh.
in the lives of individuals and in the culture? Uh, what do you think?
Uh-huh. As a folklorist, I study those, I teach those. They are very fascinating. Yes, it's a very important topic. Interestingly, all over the world, people have creation stories.
Hmm.
Yes, the Jews, they have that Old Testament that we all read, that those of us who are Christian. Oh, yes, Adam and
Mhm.
Eve and Abraham and all those people, how the world came into being. You have it in the Genesis, the biblical Genesis. Okay.
Hmm.
However, what's interesting is that Genesis stories exist in African traditions and how humans came to be and how they disobeyed God and how God, punished them. Those are stories you find in many traditions in Africa, and there are books published. Um, I could some other day, talk about those books. But then there are creation stories around the world. For example, in this part of the world, on the
Hmm.
American side, if you go to Mexico, the ancient civilization, the Mayan civilization,
Hmm.
they have their own creation story. It's called Popol Vuh. And I've taught it at St. Olaf College here. An amazing creation story, very different from the biblical.
Hmm.
So, as a folklorist now who
Hmm.
studies global folklore and encountering all these creation stories from from all over the world, and as a Christian, uh, it's kind of very interesting, because what you come to realize is that creation stories are universal. All human societies somehow knew, that God created them.
Hmm.
They have different stories. So, what is the true story of creation? I hesitate to say that, you know, as a folklorist, I embrace all of them.
Hmm.
I don't want to turn this forum into a religious one, but let me just say, uh, I believe God appeared to all humans, and that's why we have all these stories. All
Hmm.
humans acknowledging that God created them and they violated God's commandments. And the violations, the way they are told, they are different from culture to culture. As a folklorist, I embrace all of these stories.
WD, jump in. This is a great conversation.
Yeah.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm joined by Insight Books editor WD Foster-Graham, and thanks for bringing this great conversation to life, WD. You have questions or comments, observations?
Well, I have one. As when I was both reading your books, I know the one thing that sticks into my mind, well, several things. The first one is about taking culture for granted. So, what would your take be on that, both on as it's say in Africa as well as in America?
Aha, aha.
Let me jump in first before you answer that, Professor Mbele. What is culture?
Oh, that's a tough question. And I have avoided answering that question in my books.
Hmm. Okay.
Uh, I want somebody to read the whole book and then they will figure out what I mean by culture. But
Mm,
I don't define it because definitions have been very treacherous
yeah.
and inconclusive and vague and ultimately not useful.
Mm,
So um, you read the book from the first page to the last, you'll get a sense of what I mean by culture, and I don't even define it.
mhm,
Uh-huh. So I hesitate. There are many definitions, and I could give you some,
mhm.
but since I don't believe in defining culture,
Okay.
I just believe in talking about many things that we do that define our behaviors or that drive our behaviors.
Mhm.
That drive our lifestyles. And that determine what is right and what's wrong in any culture. Oh, sorry, in any society. I don't like to use the word culture because I'm supposed to define it. So I'm quickly
Okay.
correcting myself here. So, and Mr. Graham Foster will testify, I have not defined the culture in either of the books, but he has comfortably reviewed these books without questioning me or without even complaining that I didn't define culture. That's interesting. You can read his reviews and he's not even complaining. Apparently, he gets a sense of what I mean by culture without me defining it. So anyway, that's your question. Now, the original question, taking culture lightly. Um, the way I see things now, after many years of thinking about the things that are different in the American, way of life as opposed to the African way of life, I have realized culture is something we need to take very, very seriously. It can make or break relationships, whether it's personal relationships, say an African marries an American. I tell them you need to think about the cultural differences before you get into the relationship or while you are beginning the relationship, because there will be so many problems otherwise. There will be so many conflicts otherwise. But if you take your time, begin to explore and continue exploring, because it never ends, it's a lifelong journey, this study of the differences. Whether whether you are in business, for example, Americans investing in Africa, I tell them, please don't just go there and expect things to work the American way. There are African ways of doing business. There are African attitudes towards time and punctuality, for example, and deadlines and um, uh, contracts. Uh, the writing tradition that gave us this culture of having contracts. And Americans talk about read the fine print. But now you are going to Africa, cultures which are essentially oral. People have agreements without writing. You just talk to somebody, and that's a contract. Or, Mr. Al, can you can you lend me $500? I'll give you 2 bags of corn when I harvest my corn. That's a contract. And Mr. Foster Graham is there as witness. That is a contract. No paperwork. Now, Americans going out there might think things are done the American way. And that's why I tell them culture is absolutely important. So, in fact, there's a whole article in my little book, Chickens in the Bus, about culture and business between Africans and Americans. Okay. So diplomacy, for example, the way the American government speaks to the world, the language, the way they communicate, and how the world perceives it. See how Africans perceive American ways of talking. It's very, very significant. In fact, let me tell you, the way Americans talk, and I understand them, oftentimes they sound rude to the Africans because Americans tend to be direct. They tend to be direct. A yes is a yes, a no is a no. And in many situations, the Africans will not say yes or no. They will beat about the bush. They will go round and round telling stories, never hitting the point. To Americans, this is irritating, but to the Africans, this is appropriate communication. So people need to understand it. And I've mentioned eye contact, for example. And Foster Graham, you read my book. And how I misconstrued eye contact when I was in Madison, those first months, I tell some funny stories here, embarrassing, but I tell the stories of what I went through, and people can laugh at me, but I want them to laugh at me so they can learn something. It's like I'm offering myself, and let people laugh at me. I made this mistake. I made this mistake. And they learn the lessons. They learn the lessons. That's my intention, to help people avoid the pitfalls.
Mm.
I don't want people to suffer when, they could actually avoid, the situations.
Let me
I
take a break. Let me take a break and I'll come back to you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. We'll be right back. Are you or someone you know recovering financially from the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, or any other reason? If so, help is available. Findhelp.org is a site to find a wide range of resources, including food, medical care, and more. The best part is based on your zip code. Visit findhelp.org, enter your zip code and the service you need. You'll get a map directing you to the organizations that can help you. Help is waiting at findhelp.org. If you need help starting anew, findhelp.org is the site for you. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My guest is Professor Joseph Mbele, Tanzanian, a professor in the English department at St. Olaf College in Northville. He's a cultural consultant. He's helping Africans and Americans navigate our cultural differences. And he is a product of University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and also of Wisconsin-Madison, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he specializes in global literature in English and in folklore. He's published articles and books. His books, Africans and Americans Embracing Cultural Differences and Chickens in the Bus, More Thoughts on Cultural Differences, are popular among Americans who want to go to Africa and Africans who live in the US. And as we said at the beginning, we can show this question here. In November of 2017, his book, Mantengo Folktales, was featured on Jeopardy. We pulled a slide up to ask, and there you see the Jeopardy pull out there. Joseph Mbele's Mantengo Folktales includes a story about one of these long-eared beasts outwitting a lion. And I think there's an answer to that as well. Is there? There it is, a hare, and nobody got the answer. Is that right? I think our producer said nobody got it. How did that happen for you, Professor?
Oh, thank you. So, it was a strange day. My daughters told me that their friends were calling them, their American friends. We are all here in Northfield. Their American friends, young girls from around the country, they were calling them and saying, "You are dead. You are dead. I was on Jeopardy." And so my daughters were telling me, and I didn't even know exactly what Jeopardy was. Uh-huh. I mean, I had some vague understanding that there was something on TV called Jeopardy. So, and then colleagues, fellow professors at the college, they began calling me. And then I really got to realize this is something big now. And so it was big news on campus, St. Olaf College.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And messages were flying back and forth. And so I realized, hearing these Americans now telling me that this is a big, big deal. This is a big deal. And then there's a professor at McAllister, African-American professor, who told me, "Joe, do you know what this means?" And I'm like, "What?" "It means you have reached the pinnacle of American popular culture." Then things began to dawn on me. And then during a faculty meeting at St. Olaf College, the provost made an announcement. I mean, we are talking about 250 professors sitting there in that big room.
Mm-hmm.
And she projected the thing you've just projected here on the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting there. I almost died. I mean, it was incredible. So that's my story. And then wherever I go, to book events or whatever, and I have this book there with me, I make sure to show them that thing from Jeopardy, because I've made a
Yeah.
big poster now, and I show Americans, and they're all very excited. That's the story.
Interesting.
It's been a very nice way of me, again, experiencing American culture
Yeah.
and enjoying and being very grateful for the appreciation.
Mhm.
I so appreciate that people in this country appreciate the work I've done, and it has just been a great experience. And for me to have written this book, which is folk tales from my culture, to have them embraced by Americans like that. And there are colleges where they teach this book, actually. I know some colleges. So you can imagine how I feel that my culture has been embraced that way. And when I'm back in Tanzania, I tease the people of my culture, the Matengo people, that guess what? You are well known in America now. Yeah.
Maybe you can share a passage or two out of one or both of your books. Do you have anything bookmarked or earmarked that would be a way to invite our viewers and listeners to learn and to hear your book in your voice? Is there a piece that you want to read or could read?
Oh, actually, the stories are a bit long, but there is a video of me telling one of the stories on YouTube. Yes, there's a story called Hawk and Crow. You know this big bird, the hawk?
Mm-hmm.
So if people can search Hawk and Crow, CROW,
Yeah.
Hawk and Crow, and they
Maybe our
type my
producer
name.
can pull that up, and if you can, Cooper,
Hawk and Crow,
we
and
can
they
watch
type
that.
my name, and it's on YouTube. They can hear me telling one of the stories.
Okay, great. Well,
Oh,
so
I have
we'll try to pull that up off of YouTube. That's number one.
Hmm.
You know, I have been to Ghana. I mentioned that to you before the show, maybe, and to Uganda, and loved being in Africa. And being there, I mentioned before the show that a couple of writers that were freelancers for Insight had gone to Festac 77.
Yeah.
And that was a phenomenal event. They described it in a phenomenal way, and it created in me an appetite to want to experience what they were experiencing when they came from here, Minnesota, to participate in Festac, the 77, I think it was.
Yeah, it
But
was.
talk about that and why that experience was of value. I used it as context for me to be associated with Panafest in Ghana, and came across Panafest in '94, but then was involved in the promotion of Panafest in '99, along with the Black Press of America. But talk about Festac, first of all, and what that means for culture.
Yeah. I think it was a great moment in the sense that Africans and people of African descent got to get together, to come together and showcase various contributions, cultural contributions. That in itself is a big thing, because sometimes I feel we have not done enough of that, documenting, recording, preserving our heritage. As a folklorist who records, like the tales from my culture and so on, I embrace the whole idea of Festac for that reason first, to showcase what we have for the people of the continent to display, the achievements and so on, for the people, Black people in the diaspora to do the same. Not only for ourselves, but also for the world. So, for example, if you look at the storytelling tradition, the folk tales, the epics, the myths, the legends, they embody a lot of wisdom, a lot of lessons that our ancestors bequeathed on us. Uh, Teachings about, values, about human behavior, about, right and wrong, about the challenges of life and how to, handle ourselves and how to deal with situations. You see all these lessons in the folk tales, in the proverbs, in all these things. And so it's evidence of how much our ancestors thought about everything, that concerns our lives. So when we talk about philosophy, for example, say we are teaching a class in philosophy, we should get out of the habit which we acquired from the Europeans who built those schools, of starting with the ancient Greeks
Mm.
and making this automatic association that philosophy means Socrates and Plato and all those Greeks, and nothing about the griots, the African philosophers who really taught us all the life lessons we needed, but they didn't write. They left us a legacy of the oral tradition, epics and folk tales and proverbs and songs and things. So that's the other thing. We tell the whole world our contribution to world culture,
Mhm.
so that a course in philosophy in an African institution, for example, or for that matter, in any institution, needs to incorporate, the African contributions to philosophy. This is just one example. They taught us ethics, they taught us good behavior, they taught us everything. So we should not continue that legacy of colonialism, of being told that, we didn't know a thing before Europeans came. We had no contribution to the world before Europeans came. No, no. So the education of our children could be rooted in the African traditions like that.
So would you say that I've been learning the phrase Africana way of knowing. I've been connected to a online community called Nubia. Nubia
Uh-huh.
spelled with a K. You might know Dr. Greg Carr, who heads Africana Studies at Howard University, in collaboration with the broadcaster and journalist and teacher Karen Hunter, who teaches journalism at Hunter College, but also is a Sirius Radio megastar, a huge following. They've created this project that invites scholars and others to talk about what they've described and call an Africana way of knowing. And in that is an elevation of the study of hieroglyphics, for example, and the systems and cultures that produced hieroglyphics, and the concept of Ma'at, African creation stories that explain how from nothing everything came into existence. How important, I mean, that's along the line of what you're just saying, to
Right.
examine more than what is being fed, because what is being fed has its own purpose and set of interests and
Yeah.
objectives, and they may not align with our health, our history, nor our future unless we make it so. And how do we make it so? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Great point. Africana, yes. And then there's also the term Afrocentricity.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. You mentioned somebody there, and we could mention other people as well. Cheikh Anta Diop of Senegal,
Mm-hmm.
but also in this country, Molefi Kete Asante,
Yes.
professor at Temple University.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. I've read his works, brilliant arguments he makes about the need for us Africans to recognize, the African origins of many of the things that we really should be talking about. So in my own works, and Mr. Foster-Graham will agree, the way I talk about African culture, for example, I'm very proud of it. I embrace it. I make no apologies. Uh-huh. Um, because we were driven to feel inferior, those types of things. I make no apologies. In fact, the very title of my second book, Chickens in the Bus, It's funny, but I embrace the tradition behind it. Anyway, we can talk about that later. But anyway, back to the question. People who are promoting Africana or the Afrocentric view, they are not just activists, wishy-washy activists who think, black is beautiful, those type of things. No, no, no. It's rooted in research. It's scientific.
Mm-hmm.
Humans originated in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can dispute that to begin with. And so when you think about that idea, what it means is this creature that we call human, the creature that was able to use tools and make tools and created language, this creature emerged in Africa. And we Africans need to, first of all, hold on to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not wishy-washy. We fast forward thousands and thousands of years. We come to ancient Egypt. Writing evolved there. The Egyptians are among the earliest humans to invent writing.
Mm-hmm.
This is not wishy-washy, black is beautiful, posturing. This is scientific. The hieroglyphics are there, the pyramids are there, the documents are there, the books are there, like the ancient book of the Egyptians, the Egyptian book of the dead, it's called in some translations. You see?
There it is.
Yeah. So exactly. Thank you. So when we say we need to do that, to go back to the roots, we are not just posturing here. This is scientific. And like I told you, I'm a trained folklorist. I was trained at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, in one of the best folklore programs in the world.
Mm.
So when I talk about our folklore, our folk tales, and then I interpret them, and then make the claim that, look, they contain these profound messages, profound lessons, profound thoughts. I'm not peddling some wishy-washy, rhetoric. This is scholarship now. So back to your question, I think the thing is so compelling, the arguments are so compelling as to why we need to do the Africana thing, why we need to return to the roots. And in my own writings on culture, first of all, I'm firmly rooted in my African culture. I am very proud of it. And I defend it. And that's it.
It's powerful. Let's listen to 3 minutes or so of the video. We found the video from YouTube. It's a 10-minute video. We don't have time to listen to the whole thing, but this will be a chance to hear your voice reading one of your stories. Let's
Thank
listen
you.
to about 3 minutes ago.
It's about hawk and crow. These birds, big birds, the hawk and the crow. Now, in the folk tales, we don't say the hawk and the crow. These are persons. So I will say hawk and crow. There was hawk and crow, and they were very good friends. One day, hawk said, "Crow, let's go lay eggs." So they went out and laid eggs. And soon those eggs hatched, and they had chicks running all over the place. And hawk said, "Crow, stay with the chicks. I need to go down to the river to do some fishing." And so hawk left, and crow stayed with the chicks. As soon as hawk had left, crow disappeared with the chicks. When hawk came back, she saw neither crow nor the chicks. She started worrying. She went to the next house, to their neighbor's house, and she asked the people there, "By the way, could it be that you saw crow passing this way?" Now, I'm translating it this way because I'm trying to capture the Matengo language.
And it might sound a bit clumsy in English, but that is the spirit of the original. So the people said, yes, she passed here. She said she was going to the river to feed the chicks with ngoko. Now, the word ngoko is a Matengo word, and it means all those little things, bits and pieces, little insects that chicks or chickens eat. So the collective noun in Matengo is ngoko. So that's what those people said. So Hawk went to the back of the house and she began to sing this song. Mwakana Kongo malango nzelale, malango nzelale, nzelale, nzelale. Mwakana Kongo malango nzelale, malango nzelale, nzelale, nzelale. Mwakanitole banango nzelale, banango nzelale, nzelale, nzelale. Mwakanitole banango nzelale, banango nzelale, nzelale, nzelale. The translation in English would be, you crows, you have no brains. You have no brains. You crows, you have no brains. You have no brains. You took away my chicks. You have no brains. You took away my chicks. You have no brains.
Whoa.
Hmm. Whoa.
Oh, man.
Awesome. Wow.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for
And
showing
you
that.
know I got to finish watching it as soon as we get done here.
Me too.
That is compelling
Yes.
and beautiful. Well, we're putting the link. Our producer put the link in, but put it in the comment section as well, so the people who are viewing can find the link and watch the rest of that. How did it end? Let me ask you that. Is there an end to it? A brief end?
Oh, the end of that story?
Yes.
Aha. Because Crow has run away with all the chicks now, and she has gone to hide somewhere. And then Hawk is trying to find out where Crow went.
Mhm.
Finally, through the intervention of some friends, they find out where Crow was hiding with the chicks, and Hawk is so furious. She starts a big fight and kills Crow.
Mhm.
That's the end of the story.
Okay.
Ooh.
Well, I'm going to be listening to the full story and sharing it with people as well. It's a great story. This has been a great conversation. And, I'd like to come back and talk to you more, Professor, about this idea of Africana ways of
Yeah.
knowing and
Yeah.
how literature, how language itself, what it means to us, and how we need to see ourselves as both the inventors and the possessors, the creators of the capacity to what's the right word for it? To speak, I guess. The whole invention of relationships that have sound as well as deed, or sound that describes deed. How do we come to the genius of being a human being? It's really amazing that we are able to conceptualize and then communicate and categorize. So I'd love to have that conversation with you, and I'm sure that comes out as one of the core lessons and learnings as a folklorist that you deal with every day and all day.
And before we go, where can we purchase your books?
Oh, there's a website. I published them. It's www. Lulu. Com. That's it.
Lulu, Lulu.
Yeah.
Excellent.
www.lulu.com.
Awesome. Professor, thank you so very, very much.
Oh,
WD.
that's it. That's it.
WD, thank you. It's so good to see you again. I'm Al McFarlane. This has been The Conversation with Al McFarlane. My thanks to you for listening. And as I said, support us by subscribing, sharing, and liking. We'll see you next time. Take care.